Welcome to the High EQ Marketer. I'm John Busby. This show is about learning from the best and most interesting marketers in the world, which are, not a coincidence, highly emotionally intelligent. If you'd like inspiration, lessons, war stories from startups or Fortune 500 companies, that's why we're here. So let's go. Today, we're going to talk about the job market for recent college grads and/or people looking to break into a marketing career. My guest, Ryan McGonagill, engaged in a really interesting research study. He hired 4 marketing interns for this summer for a 10-week internship. And these interns, although they were recent college grads, they all had previous work experience, community involvement, and an interest in getting a job in marketing. And so the purpose of the internship, to apply for their next marketing job and then record all of that data in the process to basically publish a research report on the state of the job market. So it's a really cool conversation. Ryan is going to share what he found. We also talk about PR, comms, and a whole bunch of interesting topics. The reason is Ryan is the director of comms and industry research here at Centerfield, and he manages more than a dozen brands. And so if you're a PR professional, you'll also get a sense for the special sauce that Ryan brings to the table and how he approaches comms and PR for a brand, which I think is really unique and has proven to be really successful. So one more thing, because I don't ask for much, would you hit the 5-star review? Would you subscribe so that new episodes are automatically downloaded? Because these things help a ton in getting the word out about this podcast, and also leave a review. I'm here with Ryan McGonagill, my colleague and friend today. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, John.
We're going to talk about the job market and what's facing recent college graduates and folks that want to get into marketing, or probably really any job. Maybe as a way to get us in the zone here, Ryan, take us to when before we met. What was your first job in marketing? How'd you get into marketing? How did you break into this discipline?
Yeah, I actually had a communications job for a couple of years in college, and it was a work study gig. So writing blog posts or site content, press releases. And I remember they gave me probably a completely inappropriate amount of access to their website. So in hindsight, I hope they fixed that, but it was a great gig. And then after I graduated, my first real job was as a PR specialist, and that was for an agency down in South Florida. This was a while ago, so I found it on Craigslist, believe it or not. And I thought, well, I can probably fake my way through this until I learn how to do it. And then 3 months later, I moved to Florida, stayed there for about 8 years, and just grew my skill set that way. But I don't know that, Craigslist is a viable option for new grads today.
So that won't be your first piece of advice for new graduates.
I think that was an anomaly for sure.
So we'll get to that journey from your first communications job to what you do today. But I actually want to spend some time focusing on a study that you and your team released on business.com, which is one of our websites, one of Centerfield's websites, and it's about college interns or I guess say recent graduates trying to find a job. We wanted to explore the job market. I guess set it up. First of all, how did we hire our interns, which ended up doing this research study?
Yeah, I mean, to take a few steps back, I think that this summer was particularly interesting. It was a volatile time with the job market, the economy as a whole, and that's still going on. If you think about the labor market and the Great Resignation, which was a huge topic, low unemployment, all signs pointed to it being a candidates market, regardless of those concerns. And so since our team handles research for those brands, we were trying to think about how best to explore that. And so we finally landed on a 10-week internship program so that we could get, more comprehensive data than we would through a survey or something like that. It just wouldn't have worked. And so we were essentially paying these new college grads to find a job. They got career coaching, they got exposure to the marketing field. And some of them are still with us. So I hope it was a really positive experience. In terms of how we hired them, I think we had a tricky balance to strike. We knew that we wanted a diverse group in terms of their background, where they were located, their schools, their majors, you name it, but you had to have some sort of control in there. So we focused on candidates who wanted a job somewhere in the marketing field, regardless of their background. And we ended up hiring four, um, lived in different cities, went to different schools. One studied anthropology, one studied urban planning, but they all wanted a marketing job. And so over the course of a few weeks, we had them personally apply to over 300 jobs, and they would track all sorts of data, like the time of day they did it, LinkedIn versus Indeed, what was listed in the job posting in terms of salary or phrases like entry level. The list went on and on. And so they did that for several weeks.
So we hired four interns out of how many folks do you recall applying for our internships? Was it 100? Was it more than 100? It was dozens for sure.
For sure. I would say between 100 and 150. And then, we probably interviewed 10 to 12 after, an initial meeting with our recruiting team. And then we went through our interview process from there.
So I asked that to say that we were really impressed with the interns that we hired, very excited to have them join, and felt like for what we were looking for, they were among the best of the bunch. So there's already that. And so we hired them. They had a marketing research job. We thought they were really good. And then we asked them to apply to jobs. And so what happened? I know they applied to hundreds of jobs. What happened?
Yeah, I said during the program they were the best group of interns I've worked with, and that's really true. I mean, I've been doing summer programs like this for 10 years, and they were by far the most qualified, quote unquote entry level candidates that you could find. So they had several internships during college. They had an internship with us. They were super involved in their communities or with extracurriculars, everything that you're told you need to get, be competitive for a job right after college. And they also only applied to jobs that they were a fit for. So entry level, or they met 90+% of the qualifications. And so out of those 300, they only got interest from 5% of employers for those jobs. And out of that interest, I think half of them, expressed interest, and they ghosted the interns, the candidates. So it was a much lower hit rate than I think they expected, or even we expected, based on them really on paper being set up for success.
Okay, so they already had all the qualifications of the job, got 5% hit rate
Mm-hmm.
or response of any kind. And then within that 5% had a lot of experiences that left a lot to be desired. Maybe I'd love to hear about some of the observations or conclusions that our team had in looking for a job. Like what do they wish employers would do or not do? How do they feel about the job market? I guess I'm asking.
I think that they came to the conclusion that it truly is a numbers game. I think there's a few reasons for that. So many more companies are hiring remotely, or they're offering positions with flexible travel schedules. And so what that means is exponentially more applications and competition. What's interesting about that we found, though, is that employers, even if they were advertising for a remote position, would be more interested in a candidate like one of our candidates if they happen to be local. So even though we are, preaching this shift to remote and hybrid work, it's still either a consideration or even a bias based on what we saw. I think graduates also have smaller professional networks, and it has an impact. I mean, this is anecdotal, but thinking back to every job I've ever had, except for the Craigslist one that I mentioned, I knew someone at my next company who vouched for me. And so that helps you stand out from other people. And if you don't have that network, which if you've just graduated, you're not going to, it's tougher through no fault of your own. I think the final thing that they noticed is it didn't seem that their applications were evaluated maybe holistically. So now, a lot of companies don't or say they don't screen candidates just on a cover letter or years of experience or do you have this exact degree. They'll ask a lot of behavioral or identity questions so that they can take a more holistic approach to evaluating. But that didn't necessarily seem to be the case here. It all seemed to be, you know, we want entry level, or we're calling it entry level, but we also want you to have 4 to 7 years of experience, which they don't have. So I think those were the common themes for all four of them.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting in debriefing with you and some of our interns was their opinions on pay transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share what their observations were, and maybe we can have a discussion about that?
Yes. They obviously really appreciated it whenever the pay was transparent in the job posting, and anyone would. I think it's more important for these types of positions because you don't really have a frame of reference. You don't know what's competitive. Um, you're really just figuring out what you need to to go out and be on your own and build your own budget, right? So that was helpful. And I think that what else they mentioned that I agree with is salary is an uncomfortable conversation to have, but it is extremely important. You should be having that up front because you don't want to get to the end of an interview process and someone has been cagey about their pay grade and you've invested all this time on both sides and you're worlds apart on what's expected and what's being offered. So eliminating that up front, either in the job posting or on your initial call with the recruiter or the hiring manager, whoever it is, um, you know, they should feel comfortable discussing that. It's a key part of life, right?
Yeah, totally. It feels like having a salary band in a job listing is something that was very, very attractive to candidates, and not necessarily because a candidate's just a hired gun shopping for whatever the highest salary is. It's like a calibration.
Mm-hmm.
Should I even bother applying to this? Because as we said, it's a numbers game. So if our interns were applying to 75 or 100 or 125 jobs to get two or three discussions, or maybe even not that many, we've got to on both sides make it easier to make a good selection. Pay transparency is going to become an increasingly important and interesting conversation in the job market due to laws passed in New York and California. I have mixed feelings about it. Basically, the spirit of pay transparency is super important and super right and super good. The biggest reservation I have is something I tell my kids, which is comparison is the thief of joy,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that if you know exactly what all of your colleagues make, I don't know. It just I wish there was a way both to eliminate bias, but also be so fixated on what we all make. I don't know if I'm really saying this in a very normal, non-clumsy manner.
Well, I think you hit it on the head, right? I think the spirit behind this is on point. I think it is well intentioned, and I think that the execution will be a lot murkier than anyone expected. I think, in terms of pay transparency, whether it's in the posting or anytime during the interview process, interviewing is like dating. You're not married yet, you might be interested in each other, but if you're honest up front about your limits or what you need from each other. And so that would be like role responsibility, salary, benefits, expectations. I think the more transparency, the higher the likelihood of both sides being really, really happy.
Yeah, that's true. How did our interns feel about the notion of hybrid work? In general, did they want to be with people in an office? Did they prefer being at home and a remote full time? What was their opinion on that?
It differed. We had um, one intern comes to mind, and she really had a preference for remote work. And then we had another one who his preference was he really wanted to work with people in the office. And then our remaining two were right in between. Um, I don't know that they had strong preferences either way. I think the common theme that I heard from them was, do I feel invested in the company's culture and its mission? And do I feel like I can learn? And do I like the people I'm working with? And the physical location was somewhat secondary to that.
Hmm. Hmm. When you were managing interns who were new in their career, and I don't think anyone lived in LA, and which is where we're based. Um, how is the remote experience for you as a manager of someone new to the workforce?
I think the thing that not surprised me, because I've seen it before, but my teams over the past few years have been fairly tenured, and you forget as a manager the things that you need to focus on with a new employee, like new to the workforce. Um, not not their professionalism necessarily, but just different aspects of corporate life that might not be super sexy, but you have to get them done. So, hey, don't forget to do your timesheet on time, because otherwise, we have 45 other pieces of this process that are going to delay your check, and I don't want that to happen. Or, hey, if you happen to miss a deadline, it's really no big deal, but please, let me know in advance and we'll figure out a solution, versus kind of not saying anything. It's those little things that help them become a more seasoned professional that I think as a manager you have to remember are not always intuitive, especially to everybody.
Yeah, and so you also, from the perspective of someone new to the workforce and at a new job in their first 30 days and their first 90 days, they don't know everything. They don't claim to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give to folks entering the workforce on how to differentiate themselves at work, how to stand out, how to do an excellent job?
I think the number one thing is asking a lot of questions. What I have seen with the majority of people is they come in and they really do want to work hard, and they have really great ideas. They have great work ethic, but they don't ask enough questions because I feel like they feel it's not their place, or, my manager's busy and I don't want to bother them. And what they don't realize is that it differentiates them. It helps a manager figure out, where they might need some coaching, where the manager has failed to communicate something important, and that it's our job to help you be successful, but we can't always know what questions you have or what you're concerned about. So just not being shy to ask those questions, and you don't know what opportunities that's going to like make happen for you. I think something else is not being afraid to go outside of your job description. If you are ambitious and you do want to grow, you kind of have to make that happen for yourself just as much as you would expect the company to give you those opportunities. And without putting yourself out there, it's not going to happen. So just, I wouldn't be shy. And I would recognize that your manager owes you just as much as you owe them. It's just different things.
Yeah, there is this dynamic where your manager, you might be I might be afraid to bother them, but when you're sitting in the manager, the leader's chair, having teammates that are proactive are like the best possible thing, the best possible thing day in and day out. So yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah.
Um, you and the team are doing a bunch of other types of research for business.com. You want to touch on some of the things that you're exploring right now and some of the things you're learning?
Yeah. So I think two other pieces that are really cool. One is um, we wanted to look at diversity and inclusion metrics across a ton of different companies and a ton of different industries, because I think over the past 10, maybe 12 years, the topic of D&I has been at the forefront of the news and, corporate good and things like that. But most companies aren't transparent about their numbers. So are we actually improving? Are we making an effort? Or, is it a PR move? So over 3 months, we had the team collect um, metrics related to diversity and inclusion across 4,200 different companies in 15 or so different industries. And so what we've done is kind of created a benchmark for those industries where they can see how they're doing now. How is their, female representation or representation of people of color across all levels of the organization? Um, and where can we best improve? So if I'm a small business owner in the energy space or cosmetics or manufacturing, whatever, I can look at this research, which hopefully we'll add to over time to represent even a wider variety of groups. But I can look at that and say, okay, here's my team makeup. I'm in this industry. How am I doing, and how do I need to improve? Um, and then the second piece, we did some A/B testing with resumes. And so it was somewhat similar to the intern project, but we sent out thousands of resumes, and there were two versions. They were identical, except one had gender neutral pronouns and one did not, because there has not been any research done into the impact of that on the bias of a hiring manager or a recruiter. Um, and so we wanted to see again, how are we doing with inclusion there? And so that one's not as far along as the D&I piece, but within the next month, we'll have some, I hope, really impactful um, stories to share.
I hope so too, and I think we will. Let's zoom out a little bit because for anybody who's a PR comms professional or interested in it, you have the most interesting, interesting and awesome job that there is. You run communications comms research for a dozen brands or more than a dozen brands, and one of the interesting and cool things is that your work doesn't tend to focus on like a press release about why a these websites have achieved a certain milestone or won some type of award. Their research, like the type of research that you just articulated. Why do you think why in your opinion should brands invest in research or mission driven research or the types of stuff that you're doing as opposed to traditionally how many brands or websites approach PR?
In terms of why, I think research does two things, right? I think it actually adds value to someone who is not the company. And then if you do it right, it shows authenticity and it'll build trust. So every brand is going to think that their product or their service is the best. Um, Press releases, it's kind of a contentious topic, I guess. Some people would argue they have no value. I don't think that that's true. I think there's some value there. But my opinion is you're really only going to get significant results from that if you're one of the biggest brands. Everyone in tech journalism is going to pay attention to every Apple press release, and they're never going to do that for a random startup out of the valley, right? So if you do research, it's helping differentiate you and you're creating a really original story. So I think to start, what does your brand represent? So for example, we have a digital security brand, and there are many facets to that. You are talking about identity theft, credit card fraud, password management, and now even like cryptocurrency or NFTs. And so, where can you add value and also be an authority in each of those spaces? Um, and so, maybe it's doing consumer research and determining market demand for a new cryptocurrency and any security concerns that people might have around it, or taking government data and analyzing several years of that to identify trends regarding identity theft so that you can give people this information, but also who's most at risk and how can you help them protect themselves, regardless of whether or not that's selling a product. It's building trust. And so I think at the end of the day, as long as you're telling a story, which is the operative word here, it can't just be a bunch of disparate data points. Journalists, academics, organizations will find your research, they'll cite it, and then your brand builds that equity over time, which is not going to happen from a press release for 99.9% of companies.
Yeah, and also journalists or bloggers or whoever you're hoping recognizing your brand, if they're able to connect with your mission or learn something by what you've done, then they're much more likely to write about you. And then that's also can be much more interesting to the reader and bring folks to you who are in the awareness stage, not necessarily in the purchase stage. Maybe for folks who are in the purchase stage, you just want to go ahead and buy media, and then you want to use your PR strategy to build awareness, consideration, authority, trust for your brand.
Yeah, I think one of the conversations that will probably never go away is, if someone's not familiar with PR or comms, like a business owner who's maybe more technical, and you go in to pitch a client or to pitch your executive, and the question is, how can we directly attribute this to revenue? And the answer, in my opinion, is never. But it does work really well at the top of the funnel to drive people further down if you do it right. And so there is a downstream impact.
No question. Ryan, great to talk to you today. Thanks so much for joining the pod.
Yeah, thanks, John.
You've been listening to The High EQ Marketer. Subscribe to us anywhere you listen to podcasts, and if you enjoyed this episode, please drop us a like, rate the show 5 stars. That's the high EQ thing to do. Thanks for listening.